provoked great resentment. A delegation of Jews traveled to Caesarea to protest the presence of the standards and call for their removal. After 5 days of discussion, Pilate sought to frighten the petitioners with the threat of execution by his soldiers, but their determined refusal to yield caused him to accede to their request. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 55-59-3, 1. Philo, a Jewish writer of the 1st century CE in Alexandria, Egypt, describes a somewhat similar act by Pilate evoking protest, this time involving gold shields bearing the names of Pilate and Tiberius, which shields Pilate placed in his quarters at Jerusalem. A Jewish appeal went to the emperor at Rome, and Pilate was ordered to remove the shields to Caesarea. The embassy to Gaze, XXXVIII, 299-305. Josephus lists yet another disturbance. To construct an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem from a distance of about 40 kilometers 25 mi, Pilate used money from the temple treasury at Jerusalem. Large crowds clamored against this act when Pilate made a visit to the city. Pilate sent disguised soldiers to mix in with the multitude and, at a signal, to attack them, resulting in Jews being injured and some being killed. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 60-62-3, 2. The Jewish War, 2, 175-177-9, 4. Apparently the project was carried through to completion. This latter conflict is often suggested as the occasion when Pilate mixed the blood of Galileans with their sacrifices, as recorded at Luke 13. 1. From this expression it appears that these Galileans were slain right in the temple area. There is no way of determining if this incident relates to that described by Josephus or is a separate occasion. However, since the Galileans were subjects of Herod Antipas, the district ruler of Galilee, this slaughter may have been at least a factor contributing to the enmity that existed between Pilate and Herod up until the time of Jesus' trial. Luke 23. 6-12. Trial of Jesus. On Nisan 14, 33 CE at dawn, Jesus was brought by the Jewish leaders to Pilate. As they would not enter the Gentile ruler's premises, Pilate went out to them and inquired as to the charge against Jesus. The charges were that Jesus was subversive, was advocating non-payment of taxes, and was saying he was a king, thus rivaling Caesar. Told to take Jesus and judge him themselves, his accusers replied that it was not lawful for them to execute anyone. Pilate then took Jesus into the palace and questioned him concerning the charges. Picture, Volume 2, p. 741. Returning to the accusers, Pilate announced that he found no fault in the accused. The accusations continued, and upon learning that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas. Herod, displeased because Jesus refused to perform some sign, subjected him to mistreatment and ridicule and returned him to Pilate. The Jewish leaders and the people were again summoned, and Pilate renewed his efforts to avoid sentencing an innocent man to death, asking the crowd if they wanted Jesus released in accord with the custom of freeing a prisoner at each Passover festival. Instead, the crowd, incited by their religious leaders, clamored for the release of Barabbas, a robber, murderer, and seditionist. Repeated attempts by Pilate to free the accused brought only an increase in the shouting for Jesus' impalement. Fearing a riot and seeking to placate the crowd, Pilate acceded to their wishes, washing his hands with water as though cleansing them from blood guilt. Some time prior to this, Pilate's wife had advised him of her troublesome textoi acute merita longo. Piles 641 actions of the Jews themselves were largely responsible for the strong measures the governor had taken against them. At any rate, the gospel accounts give some accurate insight into the man's makeup. His approach to matters was typical of the Roman ruler, his speech terse and blunt, outwardly expressing the skeptical attitude of the cynic, as in saying what is truth. He, nevertheless, showed fear, likely a superstitious fear, upon hearing that he was dealing with one who claimed to be God's son. Though obviously not a condescending type, he displayed the politician's lack of integrity. He was concerned primarily with his position, what his superiors would say if they heard of further disturbances in his province, fearful of appearing to be overly lenient toward those accused of sedition. Pilate recognized Jesus' innocence and the envy that motivated his accusers. Yet he gave in to the crowd and turned an innocent victim over for them to slaughter rather than risk damage to his political career. As part of the superior authorities, Pilate exercised power by divine tolerance. Row 13. when he bore responsibility for his decision, responsibility that water could not wash away. His wife's dream was evidently of divine origin, even as were the earthquake, the unusual darkness, and the rending of the curtain that took place on that day. Mount 27. 19, 45, 51-54. Lu 23. 44, 45. Her dream should have warned Pilate that this was no ordinary trial, no ordinary defendant. Yet, as Jesus said, the one delivering him to Pilate bore the greater guilt of sin. Joe 19. 10, 11. Judas, who originally betrayed Jesus, was called the son of destruction. Joe 17. 12. Those Pharisees who were guilty of complicity in a plot against Jesus' life were described as subjects for Gehenna. Mount 23. 15, 33. Compare Joe 8. 37-44. And particularly the high priest, who headed the Sanhedrin, was responsible before God for handing over God's son to this Gentile ruler for sentencing to death. Mount 26. 63-66. Pilate's guilt did not equal theirs. Yet his act was extremely reprehensible. Pilate's distaste for the promoters of the crime evidently was reflected in the sign he had placed over the impaled Jesus, identifying him as the King of the Jews, as well as his curt refusal to change it, saying, "What I have written I have written." Joe 19. 19-22. When Joseph of Arimathea requested a dead body, Pilate, after first displaying the thoroughness of a Roman official by making sure Jesus was dead, granted the request. Mr. 15. 43-45. The concern of the chief priests and Pharisees over the possibility of theft of the body brought the terse reply, "You have a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how." Mount 27. 62-65. Removal on death. Josephus reports that Pilate's later removal from office resulted from complaints lodged by the Samaritans with Pilate's immediate superior, the governor of Syria, Vitellius. The complaint was about Pilate's slaughter of a number of Samaritans who were deluded by an impostor into assembling at Mount Gerizim in hopes of uncovering sacred treasures supposedly hidden there by Moses. Vitellius ordered Pilate to Rome to appear before Tiberius, and he put Marcellus in his place. Tiberius died in 37 CE, while Pilate was still on his way to Rome. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 85-87 1. 18, 88, 89 2. History gives no reliable data as to the ultimate results of his trial. The historian Eusebius of the late 3rd and early 4th centuries claims that Pilate was obliged to commit suicide during the reign of Tiberius' successor Caligula. The Ecclesiastical History, 2, 7, 1. Pildash. Sixth named of the 8 sons of Abraham's brother Nahor by his wife Milcah. GE 22. 21-23. 11. 29. Thales. Hemorrhoids. Swellings of veins at the anus, frequently accompanied by bleeding. In this often painful disorder, there are vascular tumors beneath the mucous membrane textoi acute uretra longo. Pillar 642. Ancient peoples, particularly the Greeks and the Romans, invoked their deities for cures by presenting to them replicas of afflicted body parts, or they presented models thereof in gratitude for supposed cures. Since gerboas, mouse-like jumping rodents, were bringing the land to ruin 1 6. 5. Some scholars believe the Philistines were afflicted with bubonic plague, a highly fatal infectious disease marked by such symptoms as fever, chills, prostration, and painful enlargement of the lymphatic glands, or burbos. This plague is transmitted chiefly through bites by fleas that have bitten infected rats or other rodents that are dying or dead. A death-dealing confusion occurred when the ark was in Ekron, where the men that did not die had been struck with piles. 1 5. 10-12. Both pile and jerboa images are mentioned at 1 Samuel 6. 4, where the Philistine priests and diviners are quoted as saying, "Every one of you and your Axis lords have the same scourge." But this may mean only that the entire nation, the Axis lords and people alike, had suffered a common calamity, the same scourge, not necessarily that the rodents and the piles were associated in one epidemic disease or plague. The Bible seems to indicate only that the jerboas destroyed vegetation throughout Philistia, thus ruining the land, and does not specifically state that they were carriers of infection to the Philistines stricken by Jehovah. Pillar millstone. a family head of Israel or a representative of the family of that name attesting the apostolic trustworthy arrangement. NE 9. 38. 10. 1, 14, 24. Pillar. An upright structural support or column, or something resembling or comparable to such a supporting column. Some ancient peoples of the Middle East set up sacred pillars in connection with their false religion. Quite likely these involved phallic symbolism. The Israelites, upon entering the Promised Land, were to destroy such sacred pillars, and they were forbidden to set up pillars of that sort. De 7. 5. 16. 22. However, at times they took up heathen religion and used sacred pillars. 1 Chi 14. 23. 2 Chi 3. 2. See sacred pillar. Quite apart from the improper use of pillars hated by God, the Hebrew scriptures mention the setting up of pillars or stones of a commemorative nature. Such pillars were neither objects of idolatrous worship nor symbolic of sex organs. They served to recall historic acts or events. On 2 occasions Jacob set up stone pillars at Bethel. Both instances involved taking note of Jehovah's dealing with Jacob in a special way at that place. GE 28. 18, 19, 22. 31. 13. 35. 14. 15. The pillar Jacob stationed over Rachel's grave was no doubt stone and still existed in Moses' day. GE 35. 19, 20. When the Israelites accepted the laws Moses had received from God, Moses built an altar and 12 pillars corresponding with the 12 tribes of Israel. Acts 24. 4. Joshua gave similar instruction involving stones to represent the tribes, though the account does not